You're listening to The Culture Report, the voice of Russia, America's weekly look into the world of arts, culture, and history. I'm Rob Sachs. It wasn't until after the Cold War ended, the United States began enlisting female fighter pilots, but during World War II, the Soviet Union had no less than 3 all-women aviation regiments. And now the story of one of its greatest heroes is told in the new book, The White Rose of Stalingrad, the real-life adventure of Lydia Vladmirovna Litvyak, the highest-scoring female air ace of all time. It's written by historian Bill Yenne, who joins us now. Welcome back.
It's great to be with you again, Rob.
So let's first talk about women in aviation at this time. This is something that was really unique to the Soviet Union. I understand it was mainly because of one woman, Marina Roskova. Who was she, and how did she open the doors for others to follow?
Well, first of all, she became the idol of all the Russian girls who were interested in flying, and she did so by becoming a sort of a larger-than-life heroine in pre-war aviation. Going back to the 30s, there were a lot of women aviators in the West that people are familiar with. Amelia Earhart comes to mind immediately. But Marina was that in Russia. In 1938, she was part of a crew who flew a very long-distance flight from Moscow to the Soviet Far East, a long, nonstop flight at a time when those kinds of flights were rare, and she became quite prominent. She was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union decoration for that flight, and she became a prominent figure in Russian aviation. When the war started, the Soviet military at first was not interested in employing women in combat roles. That was something that just wasn't done in militaries of any country. But as time went on, and as there became a great urgency for as many people as possible to help defend against the Nazi invasion, and as over 300,000 women volunteered for combat, they started being introduced into various units throughout the Soviet Army. However, in the case of the Soviet Air Force, Marina went to Stalin personally. She had gotten to know him when she became a heroine and was decorated. He awarded her Hero of the Soviet Union personally. She knew him. She went to him and said, rather than just putting women into various units in the Air Force as was being done in the Army, why don't we form specific all-women regiments? And at first he resisted that idea, but she eventually talked him into it. And so it was, even though there were women in combat roles throughout the Soviet military, it was only in the Soviet Air Force, and it was only because of Marina that there were all-women regiments. And so there was a fighter regiment, a day bomber regiment, and a night bomber regiment. And Lidiya was one of the fighter pilots.
So let's move on now to Lidiya, as she was known back then. She came up. She was a big fan, idolized Marina. How did she get into being a pilot, and how did she join the military?
Well, before the war, there were, thanks in part to people like Marina, there was a lot of interest in aviation among young girls. And just as there was a parallel interest in aviation among boys and young men, and so there were these flying clubs that were formed in the Soviet Union where young people could go and learn to fly. And the idea was not at that point not so much that these young girls were going to be flying in combat, but it was to encourage young people to learn to fly. Parenthetically, my own mother learned to fly here in the United States at that same time. So there was a general interest worldwide by young people in learning to fly. And Lidiya was one of those, and she learned to fly. And then when the Soviet Union was invaded in 1941, here's Lidiya, who has 4 years of flying in airplanes, and she was in her mid-teens, and she was one of many who volunteered for the Soviet Air Force. And she and they were sort of at the right place at the right time. When Marina was granted permission to form these regiments, she put out the call, we're forming these regiments, we're looking for applicants. So hundreds of young women came and applied, and Lidiya was selected.
So she was thrust into this war and going up against the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, which was really unparalleled at the time in terms of its technology and experience, so a pretty formidable foe.
Absolutely. The Luftwaffe was the best air force in the world. They had the best training, they had the best equipment, and in the early stages of World War II, in the summer of 1941, when they invaded the Soviet Union, they essentially wiped out 90% of the Soviet Air Force in a matter of weeks or days even. And so it was a very formidable foe, but the Soviet Union rebounded from that, moved aircraft production east of the Ural Mountains, brought in new pilots, trained new pilots, and gradually these pilots were building themselves up to the point where they could truthfully challenge the Luftwaffe. And by the time that Lidiya got into action in September of 1942, which was a year and a couple of months after the invasion, I wouldn't say that the tide was turning, but the lopsided victories that the Luftwaffe had won earlier in the war, that period had definitely been reversed, and the Soviet pilots were starting to hold their own against the Luftwaffe, which was still a formidable foe. And it was, this whole thing came to a head at Stalingrad in the winter of 42-43, and that was where Lidiya was.
And Lidiya, in terms of her rise in the Soviet Air Force, I mean, it only took her a month where she already became one of the best fighters there, earning the distinguished title of ace pretty quickly. Can you tell us about how she was able to so quickly ascend through the ranks there?
Well, it was skill. She was just a very, very good pilot. You often hear about people who are a natural, whether it's in sports or whatever. She was just a naturally good pilot, and she discovered that she was, and those who were in command of her discovered that she was a naturally good fighter pilot. And she was, curiously enough, she was transferred out of the all-woman regiment in the fall of 42, and she was part of a cadre of exceptionally good women pilots who were put into frontline units, which were mostly male, where these women had to not only prove themselves as pilots, but to prove themselves as women pilots. And then once they got into combat, there were several of them who really excelled, and before long, Lidiya had been in combat, actual air-to-air combat with the Luftwaffe a sufficient number of times that she had shot down 5 enemy planes, and then, of course, which is the threshold to become an ace, and then, of course, she went on from there.
And she didn't come out unscathed either in some of these dogfights. I understand she had some life-threatening injuries.
Oh yeah, she was very badly injured in a number of fights, especially in the late winter of 1943. She was injured very badly in a fight. The good news is that she took out the German before she struggled home, but she was badly injured there. She was badly injured, and in that particular fight, she was out of the air for a month, and was supposed to have been out of action longer, but she went back and volunteered to get back into the fight, and eventually her 5 victories became 10, and in the end she scored at least a dozen. There are a lot of ambiguities and uncertainties in the records, but it's certain that she scored at least a dozen. She may have scored as many as 18.
At this point, how well known was she in the Soviet Union?
She had become, by the time she was an ace twice over, she had started to be recognized. Her picture was appearing in the papers, and she was starting to become quite famous.
So let's go to the Battle of Stalingrad. This is where Stalin issues that not one step back decree, meaning nobody can retreat. This is a fight to the death, where they really took their stand, and it turned out to be one of the key turning points in the war. What was the role of the Air Force at that time, and specifically Lidiya's role in helping defeat the Germans?
Well, it was the aerial battlefield was layered. On the bottom layer were the ground attack airplanes that were flying out to attack the enemy on the ground, whether it was the German planes attacking Soviet troops in Stalingrad or Soviet planes attacking Germans approaching Stalingrad. And then once the Germans got into Stalingrad and had basically captured the city, it was the reverse of that. Then above that was the layer of fighter planes that were trying to shoot down those bombers. Above that was the layer of fighters that were trying to engage the fighters on the second layer, and then above that another layer of fighters attacking those fighters. So her role was to attack bombers and or to fly in this layer where they were engaging the fighters that were trying to protect the bombers. So it was what fighter pilots call a target-rich environment. So when she flew to fight, there was no shortage of airplanes out there to engage, and she did engage them, and she did win more often than she lost. She was only shot down a couple of times.
Well, let's talk about the time when she really lost and was shot down and didn't make it back.
Yeah, that was on the 1st of August in 1943. Just a couple of weeks before her 22nd birthday. It's interesting to note that she had scored all those aerial victories as a 21-year-old. The phrase I use in the book is a young woman who was barely old enough not to be called a schoolgirl. And so a couple of weeks before her 22nd birthday, she took off, and by this time her regiment was fighting down in the eastern Ukraine, and she took off, engaged a group of German fighters. It was an afternoon mission. There was a lot of cumulus clouds in the area. The other Russian pilot that she was flying with saw her fighting these Germans, and then she just vanished without a trace. They looked for her, and they never found her. And it wasn't until 1979 that a body matching her description, or a skeleton matching her description, was discovered near the wreckage of a World War II fighter plane that she was confirmed to have been killed in action.
So despite being one of the most decorated pilots and being a national hero, she was not awarded with that honor until much, much later. What prevented her from receiving an official honor from the Soviet Union for her role in the war?
Well, she was widely decorated during her lifetime, but the ultimate decoration was the Hero of the Soviet Union, the Red Star of the Hero of the Soviet Union, and that was denied her because it was not awarded to people who were missing in action. Only to people who were living or who were confirmed to have been killed in action. Then they could be awarded posthumously. And because she had disappeared and there was no trace of what had happened to her, she was denied that honor. And until after she was, her body was discovered, and even then, partly because so much time had passed since the war, it took until 1980 before Mikhail Gorbachev personally awarded her posthumous medal in 1990.
So thinking about this lost story of World War II, what do you want readers to think about in terms of Lidiya's courage and in terms of also the contributions of women during the war?
Well, I think that Lidiya was a woman, and but she was also a unique individual. She was the best of the best, and I think what I'd like to have people know about her is her story of a young girl growing up in the 20s and 30s, very difficult times, and of how she and her generation answered the call of their motherland when the Nazis invaded, and put their lives on the line along with the men, and how she and certain others really distinguished themselves among the best fighter pilots, male or female, in the Soviet Air Force during that period, and because she was the one who achieved the greatest number of victories as a female fighter pilot, I think she deserves a great deal of recognition. As for women in general, I think it demonstrates that women have the same capabilities or the same potential as men in virtually any endeavor.
That's Bill Yenne. His new book is called The White Rose of Stalingrad. Thanks so much for your time and for telling us this amazing story.
Thank you, Rob.
Coming up next on The Culture Report, beating the odds in Vegas by using sabermetrics.
At its best, when analyzed correctly, data can identify skill sets. And sometimes those skill sets are different than the results.
That's just ahead on The Culture Report. I'm Rob Sachs. From the latest headlines to in-depth discussions on topics from America and abroad, tune in every afternoon here on 1390 AM in Washington, D.C., 1430 AM in New York City, and 99.9 HD2 in Miami. Join us on American Edition Afternoons here on The Voice of Russia.